The mysterious black substance had been dormant in the town for decades, but suddenly it awoke and began slaughtering humans, seeping into every corner and spreading like a virus. A man and a woman were forced into despair, ready to accept death, but in the next moment, why did such a phenomenon occur? And what exactly was this black substance? Without further delay, the story begins. Hank, a football player, was the star of his high school and even won the heart of the cheerleader, Stacy. Late at night, he took Stacy on dates in his car. After that, whether eating, sleeping, or even in the bathroom, they never forgot to passionately kiss. Hank thought he could be happy with Stacy forever, but the appearance of another man changed everything. One day, Stacy came to Hank and told him she had fallen for someone else, asking to break up peacefully. The blow was so heavy that during his next football game, Hank was completely out of focus. When his teammate passed him the ball, he looked toward the stands and was stunned to see Stacy passionately kissing her new boyfriend. Hank froze, not knowing what to do, completely unaware that something had wrapped around his leg. When Hank woke again, he learned his lower leg was badly injured and for the rest of his life he would limp. That meant he could never play football again. But he couldn't stay lost forever, so Hank took a job as a cashier at the supermarket, only to run into Stacy and her new boyfriend, Ted. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, more than 10 years had passed, while the black substance that had tripped Hank spread wildly across town. Yet aside from being ugly, it caused no harm, so people simply let it grow. During those years, Hank never dated again, living only with his father. But tragedy struck when his father suddenly passed away from a heart attack. After losing both love and family, Hank felt life was unbearable. So he climbed the mountain to drink away his grief. But no matter what, life had to go on. The next day, Hank, working as a school janitor, went to his job as usual and was surprised to see his old football trophy still displayed in the school's cabinet, which gave him encouragement. Through his own effort, he became a science teacher, teaching students about bacteria and microbes. Hank handed out petri dishes to everyone, asking them to spit into them for research. But just then, a girl named Grace raised a question, asking why they didn't study that substance called the ick. This left Hank speechless because humanity had hardly studied the ick and no one knew whether it came from a meteorite or an escaped lab experiment. Still, since it didn't affect normal life, people coexisted peacefully with it. After class, Hank went to the bar his father had left him, where Ted offered to buy it. Perhaps to provoke him, Ted didn't come alone, but brought his wife and child. In their conversation, they mentioned Grace's zodiac sign, and Stacy said she was a Capricorn, but Hank was shocked, asking if she wasn't a Pisces. This instantly reminded him of the past, and after calculating the timing of Stacy's pregnancy, he suspected Grace might be his daughter. Luckily, he had already collected the students' saliva samples, so Hank decided to run a paternity test. Meanwhile, Grace quarreled with her father, and in a fit of anger, she grabbed his golf club and took out her rage on the ick in the yard. After venting her rage, she left, satisfied, never noticing that the once still ick had begun to move. At that same moment, Hank was preparing dinner when the ick suddenly appeared behind his head, almost killing him. He angrily tore it off and threw it outside, but how had it gotten into the house? To figure it out, Hank trapped a piece of the ick in a glass jar for observation. He discovered a rule: the ick moved wildly, but stopped completely under UV light. Cut to someone else, who recklessly licked the ick just to go viral online. Meanwhile, since Hank suspected Grace might be his daughter, he couldn't help but watch over her, trying to support her dream of joining a band. But he was insulted by Grace's boyfriend Dylan, and even misunderstood by a teacher who liked him, who slapped him hard. Heartbroken, Hank once again went to the mountain to drink, only returning home once he calmed down. Determined to face life again, Hank decided to renovate his father's bar. But just as he hung a decorative lamp, someone walked in. Hank quickly explained the bar wasn't open and that most drinks weren't available. The man ignored him and sat at the counter demanding a whiskey. Hank felt the man was acting strange, but he still poured him a drink as requested. The man downed it in one gulp and signaled for another. Hank cautiously poured again, but then the man suddenly vomited a thick black substance. Terrified, Hank pulled out his phone to call the police, only to witness a horrifying sight. The man used tentacles from his mouth to swallow a kitten whole. Now Hank saw his monstrous face clearly, a terrifying creature. He panicked, grabbed a hammer, and smashed the tentacles with all his strength. Hank realized the man had been infected by the ick, so he grabbed anything nearby to defend himself. At first, nothing worked, until he grabbed the decorative lamp from the wall, and the instant the tentacles touched it, they burst into flames. The man screamed in agony before fleeing the bar in a miserable state. Hank, out of danger, let out a sigh of relief, then looked nervously at the lamp that had saved his life, shocked to see it bore no burn marks at all. Not long after, the police received a call and rushed to the bar, and Hank hurried to explain, saying that a monster had stretched out its tentacles and eaten a cat. As soon as the words left his mouth, Hank saw one of the officers pick up a piece of the ick from the ground, telling him that this stuff was harmless. Hank froze in shock because the faces of the two officers were pitted and covered in terrifying black blotches, clearly showing they too were infected by the ick. What was most shocking was that they even invited Hank to a party at Dylan's house, though first they said he would need to be remade. Hank understood that the police wanted to infect him, so he pretended to know nothing, trying to slip away quietly. But the officers had no intention of letting him go, quickly opening the patrol car door to show him the inside. When Hank saw another infected person inside, his heart sank completely. The officers then shoved him into the car. At the critical moment, Hank smashed the glass with an object and jumped out of the police car. He sprinted to his own car, started it, and tried to speed away. But at the worst possible moment, his car stalled and wouldn't move an inch. The two officers burst into laughter. They slammed into Hank's windshield and even pulled out a gun. Hank thought he was done for, but fortunately, the car started just in time. On the road, Hank remembered the police saying they were going to Dylan's party, and he realized the students there would be in danger. Most importantly, Grace, Dylan's girlfriend, would definitely be there, and Hank didn't want her to get hurt, so he frantically called her. He told her in panic that the police were heading to the party, that it was dangerous, and she needed to find a way to leave immediately. He also confessed that the reason he was saying this was because he believed he might be her biological father, and he couldn't bear to see her get hurt. But to his shock, the one who answered the phone was Stacy, who furiously warned Hank to stop talking nonsense, reminding him that they had only been together that one time and telling him not to dream of stealing someone else's daughter. Stacy went on with more cruel words before hanging up without mercy. Hank was left helpless, but he had no time to dwell on it, because the two officers were already chasing him again. Meanwhile, Hank's car got its wheels tangled in the ick in the middle of the road. Seeing the police car charging forward, Hank reversed, and with his sharp driving skills, he barely escaped. But the two officers weren't going to give up, continuing their pursuit. Seeing the police car closing in, Hank swerved sharply, causing one officer to be thrown from the car and break multiple bones. Yet in a horrifying twist, even with a broken neck, the officer still wasn't dead. Cut to Hank arriving at Dylan's house, shouting that the ick was killing people and that everyone needed to run now. But to the people at the party, his words sounded ridiculous, and they thought Hank was drunk. Hank ignored them, grabbed Grace, and tried to take her away. But Dylan stopped him, mocking Hank as a pervert, and then tried to leave with Grace. Hank continued pleading with Grace to come with him, but she berated him harshly. The rest of the party joined in, making Hank feel utterly humiliated. He turned and left. Not long after he left, Dylan tried to take advantage of the moment with Grace, but she rejected him. Grace went to the guest room to rest. Unable to control himself, Dylan went to look for another girl. Meanwhile, another man, seeing Dylan succeed, felt jealous and unwilling, so he ran to the bathroom to fix his appearance, determined to charm a girl himself. But then the ceiling light flickered, and the sink began to act strangely. Nervously, he reached his hand into the sink, only to find a clump of hair clogging the drain. He had just let out a sigh of relief when a sticky lump of ick fell onto his face. He looked up in terror. At the same time, another boy was swimming in the pool outside when suddenly something yanked him underwater. The girls at the poolside thought he was pulling a prank, so no one paid attention. But the moment he was dragged under, countless ick spread through the water, and the pool became a massacre. The scene erupted into chaos. Hank, who hadn't gone far, heard the screams and instantly knew something had gone wrong, so he rushed back. Elsewhere, a girl was in the restroom on the phone, completely unaware of the horror outside. Seeing the curtain move, she angrily told her friend on the line that she would catch the pervert spying on her tonight. The ick attacked the partygoers wildly, turning the party into a living hell. People grabbed whatever they could to fight back, but it was useless. More and more people were crushed and torn apart by the violent ick. It devoured everything alive like a merciless virus. Meanwhile, Dylan was still trying to be intimate with a girl, but something felt wrong. Her body was sticky. Then came a strange sound from behind, and Dylan turned in fright. At the same time, Grace was awakened from sleep by strange sounds. The moment she opened her eyes, she saw a horrifying scene. She quickly shielded herself with a blanket as the ick attacked. But the blanket could not hold for long, and just as her life was about to be snuffed out, Hank burst in to save her. He tried to take Grace out, but as soon as they opened the door, an infected person was standing right there, forcing Hank to slam it shut again. Outside was pure chaos, and a boy still thought about apologizing to his girlfriend. But as soon as he said the words, she suddenly kissed him, infecting him instantly. Even though Hank and Grace hid inside the room, the ick seeped in through every crack, ready to consume them. Grace clung to Hank in terror, but then UV lights blazed outside, burning the ick to ash in an instant. They looked outside and saw the military had arrived, but their mission was clear: to find the mayor and protect him at all costs. Soon, all the adults in town were called by the military to gather in a large supermarket, where the officer in charge, Dr. Prentice, explained the situation. She said that with limited transport capacity, they could only escort the mayor to safety, then rush to Vicksburg to protect the hydroelectric dam. But the military would not abandon the rest of the people. They would leave a small team to reinforce the building, and the supplies inside could sustain everyone for quite some time. Someone asked what exactly was happening now. Dr. Prentice explained that the ick, after decades of dormancy, had entered its active stage, and this activity would last for 4 to 8 years before it went back into hibernation. When the people heard they would have to stay inside the supermarket for years, they grew angry, demanding answers from the government. Dr. Prentice said helplessly that the government could not help. Resources were truly scarce, and if they wanted to survive, they had to seal the supermarket doors and windows, block the drains and vents, and under no circumstances go outside. But Stacy shouted that it was unacceptable, too inhumane. Her daughter still had a tournament tomorrow and was going to be crowned prom queen. Others also shouted that they had things to do at home. Dr. Prentice said that she did not want to take away anyone's rights, that her own child had died miserably yesterday, and she only wanted to prevent the tragedy from happening again. Everyone had just calmed down, but then Ted went on stage and gave a passionate speech, and when he was done, the crowd completely refused to stay in the supermarket and insisted on leaving. In the end, everyone ran except Hank. Dr. Prentice no longer wanted to waste time and was about to leave when Hank called out to her. He introduced himself as a science teacher and wanted to share his view of the ick. The ick was undergoing 3 stages growth: energy metabolism and photosynthesis, which meant it had to hibernate, and this could be the way to destroy it. The ick was a eukaryotic organism, absorbing ultraviolet light and converting it into chemical energy, but it could not collect and convert at the same time. This explained why it could only grow in darkness and stayed motionless during the day. He concluded that using ultraviolet light at night could eliminate the ick. Dr. Prentice was thrilled and immediately called the president to report the findings. The president replied that he had long known the ick feared ultraviolet light, but the reality was that the nation had too few bulbs, and all existing stock had already been sent to Nicholsburg. When daylight came, the ick stopped moving, and people walked the streets as if nothing had happened. But many seemed delusional, claiming the ick released probiotics to strengthen their immunity and their baby's health. Even TV hosts spread nonsense, boasting that the ick could improve their stamina, and he said he could prove it. At this time, Hank gathered the school teachers to get through the night crisis and discussed countermeasures with everyone. But suddenly, one male teacher stood up and stripped off his clothes. To Hank's shock, the other teachers really gathered around him, an insane scene. Cut to Dylan driving Grace to the outskirts with nightfall approaching, and Grace urging him to go home quickly to hide. But Dylan wanted to get intimate, frightening Grace into pulling out her pepper spray. At that moment, Hank arrived, furiously dragging Dylan out of the car. Grace quickly got into Hank's car. On the way home, Hank told her he believed Dylan was infected. As he spoke, the car suddenly lost control, and Hank shouted that something was inside the engine. Trapped inside the car, Grace texted her cousin for help. She fumbled around the car and accidentally found the paternity test sample. At first, she laughed, but when she saw a photo of Stacy and Hank clipped to the rearview mirror, her smile vanished. She couldn't believe Hank might be her real father, and though she didn't get along with Ted, she also didn't want a new father to suddenly appear. Suddenly, the ick launched a violent attack on the car, ironically pushing it upright again. Then it attacked even more fiercely, and Hank grabbed expired food containing penicillin, explaining to Grace that this was poison to the ick. But there wasn't much penicillin, so Hank and Grace had to work together, using a flamethrower to burn the ick around them. At that moment, Grace's cousin arrived, and Grace quickly picked up the paternity sample. As her cousin switched on the UV lamp, she and Hank rushed into his car. At dawn, Hank sat dazed in the bar, when suddenly he saw his father, who had long been gone. His father said he had not died but had been pulled underground, and he claimed the ick could heal Hank's leg, reaching out his hand. Just as Hank reached out his hand, he quickly came to his senses and set the bar ablaze, burning it to the ground. On the other side, Grace mailed the sample and then got into Dylan's car, where he apologized for his reckless behavior the night before, and she said nothing. Meanwhile, Hank asked Stacy to meet him at the school playground because Grace had told him the night before that her mother and Ted were divorcing, and Hank wanted to know if he had a chance. But Stacy said it was absolutely impossible. That night, Hank blamed Stacy's death entirely on himself, and he went up the mountain and jumped, only to be caught by a giant net. When he turned his head, he saw it was an advertisement for Ted's charity, which made Hank furious. Immediately, Hank resolved to do everything he could to save everyone. He gathered every UV lamp he had at home, and once he was on the street, he saw Ted, who showed no sense of danger. He urged him to go home and hide, but Ted scoffed, saying the ick was everywhere and nothing to be afraid of. Moments later, he was surrounded by the ick. Hank tried to save him with UV light, but the windshield of Ted's Mercedes was UV-proof, and the windows were bulletproof. Meanwhile, Grace and Dylan were at a bar when someone nervously asked if they should close up in case the ick came inside. Others dismissed it, saying the ick was evolving, and maybe one day it would even enhance humanity. But it wasn't long before the ick attacked the bar, turning the place into a blood-soaked nightmare. At that moment, an old man hiding in the bathroom, spying on a girl, suddenly heard the chaos outside, and he peeked over the stall curiously. Meanwhile, Hank arrived at the bar and found Grace, and when he saw her safe with Dylan, he let out a sigh of relief. He tried to take Grace through the chaotic hallways, but before they could get far, the infected Dylan blocked their way. Dylan sprayed water onto Hank, and every UV lamp immediately failed. Feeling triumphant, Dylan grabbed a hammer and pressed toward Grace. At the critical moment, Hank picked up a chainsaw and brutally tore apart Dylan's insides. He thought Dylan was finally finished, but the boy's vitality was terrifyingly strong. Hank had no choice but to finish him off with a blow to the head. He then used a cutting saw to slice Dylan into pieces. Afterward, Hank finally had a quiet moment to talk with Grace. But suddenly, 2 other students fell from the ceiling. After confirming they weren't infected, Hank suggested they all head to the football field and switch on the halogen lights there, since those lights produced a bit of UV. They moved quickly, but when they reached the control room, they found the wires had been sabotaged. Hank told the students to reconnect the wires while he went to flip the breaker, or else the halogen lamps would have no power. Hearing this, Grace hugged Hank tightly, begging him to come back safely. Hank was deeply moved and limped outside. Halfway across, a gigantic ick burst out from beneath the field. Meanwhile, Grace and the others finished reconnecting the wires and waited for Hank. Suddenly, Stacy and Ted walked in, declaring their family of 3 should be together. The students attacked them immediately. At that moment, Hank was blocked by the giant creature, unsure what to do when he spotted a football. He hurled it with all his strength at the breaker switch. The next second, the halogen lights suddenly lit up, and all the ick stopped moving. Seeing this, others hiding in the school rushed to the field, knowing that if they could just survive until sunrise, they would be safe. But relief was short-lived, as the ick underground, unaffected by UV, began tearing everything apart, plunging the field back into darkness. Terrified, people scrambled upward, while countless others were devoured by the ick's merciless tentacles. Only Grace and her group managed to climb to the very top. Looking down at Hank with worry, Grace shouted that no matter who he was, he had to live. With all her strength, she pulled him up. Below them, the ick tried to pursue, but the moment sunlight shone on it, it let out a painful roar and then became completely motionless. They cheered, celebrating survival, but within seconds, a dark cloud covered the sun and the ick revived once again. Hank clutched Grace and told her that whether or not he was truly her father, he was proud of her. They then allowed the ick to crawl over their bodies, but suddenly the sun came out again. Not only that, the government finally arrived with supplies and destroyed the ick once and for all. In the final scene, Hank received the paternity report, while Grace looked on with anticipation. Their expressions were hard to read. Were they really father and daughter? The film ended here. The movie truly lived up to its name, filled with disturbing high-energy scenes, disgusting enough to shake your stomach, with strong visual impact that clearly cost a hefty budget. If you enjoy this type of movie, you can check out the original film. Alright, that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.